What message would the Apostle Paul deliver to a 21st century American audience? If he were alive today.
The author has written,
an open letter about creation and life. By trusting God. In the miracle of new life. Greetings. This is Dr. Nick, the Apostle Paul's messenger in the 21st century. This is the third episode of the podcast that I've been presenting, whose main message is the sanctity and the dignity of the human person. And each podcast is going to take a look at different aspects that really try to either promote the sanctity and dignity of the human person or try to dispel it, try to eliminate the truth that needs to be said. So today's podcast is very appropriate. I'm reading from an article, a pro-life article. It's called The Battle Between Truth and Lies. The battle here is, it's really, if I can define it, it's not a physical battle, all right? It's a spiritual battle. And there is a battle going on at that particular level. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I think what St. Paul would say about that is in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. And I'm going to paraphrase for a second. He says that our struggle and the battle, the spiritual battle, is a daily struggle. If you're trying to promote human life in today's culture, the 21st century, you're going to struggle. And I'm struggling. I'm struggling in trying to get this message out. I'm struggling by creating a podcast. I'm struggling by volunteering. And my wife volunteers as well in different areas where we can promote and support human life. Today, I like to give some very hard facts. Very hard facts. Okay. That's really going to show the spiritual battle, I guess I want to use that. And it is what St. Paul would say was, it's not our battle is not, our struggle is not against human forces, even though it comes out through humans, all right, in many ways. But our battle is really against authorities and powers, principalities and powers in regions beyond our even understanding. You're talking about beyond the human element that's played out in the human element. So the question here is, when you're dealing with a spiritual battle that is coming from a realm that is not human, but it's infiltrating the human environment, the spiritual elements that have been planted in the human spirit because of the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, which freed us to share in our spiritual life with him and with the Trinity. We're dealing with that on a regular basis. So this is what I want to share. And please permit me, what I will try to do is interject things so it doesn't look like I'm just reading, but just be patient with me. During the early 70s, 1970s, before Roe v. Wade, Dr. Bernard Nathanson and his colleagues fabricated lies about the number of illegal abortions and how many women died from them. Now, I remember some of this because of my age. I'm 75 years old, and I remember when this happened, most of what was being said then is that women were getting back alley abortions. because it was not legal in I would say probably most of the states at that time, if not all of the states. It was illegal to abort a child, which we've come a long way since then. All right, almost 70 million plus abortions. So we've come a long way not in the right direction. Now, he was a famous physician. He was called to, present his findings and his thinking to different committees, whether they be on the federal level or on the state level. He said that he and his colleagues fabricated lies. Now, this is not the author of this report saying that, because Nathanson later became pro-life after maybe aborting hundreds of thousands of children. And he admitted these falsehoods. Okay, some of the things that I remember being said, and I don't doubt that some of this did happen, but they fabricated it. They made it sound worse than what it was, that women were using coat hangers to abort children on their own, that they had to get back alley, as I mentioned, back alley abortions. What happened was they pulled the heartstrings of people. Nathanson says, adding that he and his colleagues were surprised, I'm going to quote that, surprised that the media at that time ran with the misinformation they were giving without documentation. They had no documentation, and the media took the story and ran with it, not knowing whether it was true or false. That happened in the early 1970s. Could you imagine how bad it is now? It's embedded with progressive thinking in today's world. I don't want to mention any particular political party, but I'm talking about progressive thinking as opposed to traditional moral thinking when it comes to life issues. So Nathanson said, we made it up. We exaggerated. I'll put it that way. Okay. Certainly some of these things, back alley abortions and women using coat hangers, so I'm sure some of that happened, but they made it into a grandiose problem. They didn't have the proper documentations to prove it. The media went with it. People accepted the idea. Now you have to ask yourself, why would they accept something like that? Well, my recollection of that particular point in time, I know at least in the Catholic Church, the Pope at the time, Pope Paul, wrote a encyclical, Humanae Vitae, I think it was in 1968 or 1969, I'm not sure the exact year, against artificial birth control. He wasn't saying that there couldn't be planning in the raising your family, okay? And he used, different methods that are natural family planning methods that are used quite a bit today. My wife and myself even took these courses when we were single before we got married. We took them together so we would understand what we were dealing with if we needed to, spread out having children. Those particular programs are in existence today. What he said is that the media just went with it. And that's part of the battle. We're dealing with a technology, a media that is out there. And how can you and I as individuals, or even as a group of individuals, get to a point where the media is going to be controlled in a better way? Well, one is I have a podcast. I'm on YouTube now. So what I ask you to do is spread the word about my podcast. It's a pro-life podcast. It's about the sanctity and dignity of the human person. We're going to develop a lot of areas that relate to this. So be aware. All right. Go back and look at the introduction and look at the second episode on Saint Paul. All right. And my relationship with Saint Paul. Okay. So let me just continue to read. Misrepresentation, fabrication, and falsehoods or lies, whatever you want to call them, continue to be the primary tool to advance abortion on demand until birth in America. So this is their primary tool. They use marketing experts that can twist your mind in 20 different directions. This has been very effective on their part. Okay, unfortunately, the propaganda machine continues to produce lies to advance their cause. Here are some examples, and I'm going to go through them. One is it's labeled fetal development. Okay, so we're not talking about the full range of human development. We're talking now just about fetal development. And I'm going to get into studies and a report that was, the studies were, it's an international research survey and study that was conducted. And I'm going to explain the particulars of that, as well as I'm going to read a summary that was produced by the American College of Pediatricians on human life and on fetal development. Today's effort is really going to be focused on fetal development. And then we'll get into other areas like euthanasia. We're going to get into areas about different types of abuses, drug abuse, sexual abuse, all kinds of trafficking of women, drugs. It's a mess. Crime in the streets. This is what they say, but it's not true. This is the lie. I'm going to read the lie. There is no consensus when human life begins. Now, unfortunately, I know this is true because I've talked to people and I've heard people talk, and they have said in many cases that life doesn't begin until the child is born. Well, that is absolutely not the case. And I'm going to show that today. Some people back away from that. They say, well, at the point of viability, which is about 21, 22 weeks, when the child can, with a lot of care, live outside the womb and grow and produce as a human being. Some people say, no, human life begins with the heartbeat. Some people say human life begins with the brain. Okay, either one of those two organs. But very few people, I think there was a study conducted that said 38% of Americans believe that human life begins at fertilization. 38% said they believe that. Well, that means 62% doesn't. And when you hear the research that I'm going to present today, you're going to know that the real truth doesn't get out. Doesn't get out. What gets out are the distortions and the downright lies. It doesn't get reported. This is a battle. And I want you to join me in this battle, even if you just listen. Because what I will try to do is more than just teach you. What I will do, and I say Dr. Nick, the Apostle Paul's messenger, Dr. Nick, is that I'm a doctor of higher education. Let me just read a little bit more here. The science deniers who make this claim ignore established scientific fact that even goes back to the 1940s. I'll give you one example and many people don't know this. It's called the Carnegie stages, have been deemed the gold standard on fetal development by the secular National Institutes of Health, National Museum of Health, and Medicine's Human Development Anatomy Center. This research is regularly verified by dozens of legal PhDs in human embryology. Across the globe, human embryologists who author textbooks. Now, these are individuals who put together the scientific textbooks that are read by medical students and so forth, who author textbooks on fetal development are required. Underline that word if you're in your mind. Required to rely on their Carnegie stages, which categorically state that human life begins at fertilization, not at the heartbeat, not at the brainwave, not at viability, and especially not at birth. Because if you really want to know the truth, and we're going to get into this in the future, we're still developing. Our human development continues even after birth. It begins. You can't even get to the birth part. You can't even get beyond the birth part. You can't even get to the viability or the heartbeat or the brainwave unless there is a beginning point for this whole process. These people that the embryologists, the human embryologists that write textbooks for academic institutions are required to indicate that the studies that have been conducted that say that human life begins at fertilization. Now, another lie. It's just a mass of tissues, not a baby. Well, that is really, how can a mass of tissues eventually become a human being? That mass of tissues must have something in it that will allow it to continue to develop into a human being. It goes from the zygote stage and then it continues to develop into a full human being. I'm going to try to present something on this video that will show you some of that development, but a clump of cells can never become a human being. So to say that it's just a mass of tissue, why would we believe that? But we do. We actually do believe that. There is no fetal heartbeat at 6 weeks. Now, in the state of South Carolina, they happen to, this was, I got this many years ago before we now live in South Carolina, but before we even thought about it, that they just recently passed what is called the fetal heartbeat. That means you cannot abort a child after the 6 weeks. But at the time when this is all being discussed, the Chief Justice Donald Beatty of South Carolina Supreme Court claimed, now he's a lawyer, okay? He's not trained in medicine at all, but he's making a decision about the authenticity of the medical situations that we live in. Claims babies don't have heartbeats at 6 weeks. Oh, really? Adding that it's merely an electrical signal. Duh. He decides to call the brain an electrical signal as opposed to a brain. Or, I'm sorry, the heartbeat, okay, not the brain. He decides to call the heartbeat an electrical signal and not the heart. And we believe this. Oh, it's just an electrical signal. Oh, you think the heart is? The heart has an electrical signal in it. What happened was that Dr. Tara Sander Lee represents a vast majority of experts saying a preborn baby's heart is actively beating at 6 weeks. This is a medical person, actively beating at 6 weeks. In fact, she says, 6 weeks gestation, the baby's heartbeat is about 110 beats per minute, which can be easily detected by ultrasound. But the lie was, and the judicial interpretation was, that this is not true. Why would they deny medical people's opinion when they're making a decision about whether there should be a 6-week limit before there's going to be an abortion? After that, you can't have an abortion. Well, because he didn't want it to happen that way. He used his judicial authority in the wrong way. And we better start believing these things. Okay, we don't want to think that judges and doctors and lawyers and anyone else, academic people, the media, you name it, even some of our church leaders don't tell the truth because they don't want you to know it for whatever reason they have. This is what we're fighting against. Let me just leave that part of it alone for now. We're going to get into other issues regarding that. But let me just talk about this international study. This is really important. I mentioned that only 38% of Americans indicated that life begins at fertilization. Unfortunately, that's true. What's been happening over the years is that there have been different surveys asking different questions. And one survey actually asked Americans, they gave them a list of different medical specialties and different types of medical environments. And the question was, what group do you think has the most qualifications in determining when human life begins? From a medical point of view, from a scientific point of view, okay, not from a church point of view, not from a theological point of view, not from a philosophical point of view, not from a sociological point of view, but from a scientific point of view, okay? And they asked Americans, what group did they think would have the most credibility, the most ability to make the decision on when you, and 80%, which is pretty significant, said cellular biologists or geneticists, people that spend their day looking in a microscope, people who spend their day looking at genetic development, people that spend their day looking at how cells divide and what's inside those cells. All of this is part of what cellular biologists do. So a gentleman by the name of Stephen Jacobs. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Stephen. Was a PhD candidate in the University of Chicago in the Division of Human Development. He was getting his doctorate. He was going for his doctorate. He was working on his dissertation at the time on human development. And what he did is he grabbed a hold of some of these studies, and what people believed was who was the best to identify when human life begins, okay, and so forth and so on. This really related to his human development dissertation. So what he decided to do, he decided to do a survey and to see what the results would be, an international survey. And this probably took him a while to do because I've got my dissertation and it's a lot of work. It took years to get it done. But what he did was he identified 1,058 medical research institutions throughout the globe that specialized in cellular and hiring and working on cellular biological information and research. Those 1,058 were spread out through 86 different countries. So this isn't just a United States research. This isn't just a European research. This isn't just an American research or an Asian or an African research. This is an international, 86 different countries. He was able to get, and I think this is a lot, is about 12% of the population he was going after, but 12% is quite a bit. He was able to get 5,577 biologists to agree to participate in his research. And what he did, and I think this is fascinating for me, talk about the battle, all right? He did a demographic study on these 5,577, and this is what he found. 63% were male, all right? Of the 5,577, of that 100%, 89% identified themselves as politically progressive or liberal. Now, if you were to examine that group, most of them would be pro-choice. And that's what he found out. 85% of those individuals that agreed to the study, we didn't know what their outcome was going to be yet. Okay, agree. Identified themselves as pro-choice. 61% said they were either atheists or agnostics or had no religious affiliation. They fell into some kind. So these are individuals, as opposed to someone like myself, and I'm sure many of you, who get up in the morning and thank God for another day, who might even take some time and pray before the day starts, all right, whose focus is on their relationship with God. Okay, they go through the day thinking, these people, if I were to try to stereotype them, right, they wouldn't do that. Get up in the morning, take a shower, get some breakfast, get in the car, and go and look at your microscope all day long. Okay? That's the focus. That is the center of what they do in their focus. So, but they say they're either atheists, they have no relationship with God at all, or they're agnostic. It's not that important. Or they just don't have any affiliation at all with any kind of religious group, but in fact, they function without religion in their life at all. I'm going to go right to the absolute end here. I'll tell you what happened. After all the research that was done, 96% of this group, I think it comes out to 5,300 and some individuals of the 5,500. 96 affirm that human life begins exactly at the point of fertilization. If any group were to be, I have to commend them. Give credit where credit's due. I have to commend them, despite their political, their ideological point of view. Scientifically, they could not deny, from what they can see in the microscope, that what was happening was a human life began at fertilization. So if somebody tells you, listen, it's not until birth, you can honestly say that has been disproved. What I would like to do, I don't know if I have the availability now, I'd like to do it eventually as I grow this podcast, is to make available some of these studies by email and send them back to you. Let me see if I can give you, it's Stephen Jacobs. It's a study on science that confirms that human life begins. Look it up and print it out. You would think that those individuals would say human life doesn't begin until, whenever you want to call it. They can't say that. How can they say that? They're specialists. They've been trained to see what's going on in reality. In reality, the human life begins. And then the fertilization view stands alone now as the leading biological view on when human life begins. So look at the difference. 96% of biologists affirm the fertilization view, but only 38% of Americans think that that's not true. You know why they think it's not true? Because no one's taught them. No one's outlined this particular study. And I'm a little bit disappointed in myself that I don't have the availability to send it to you, as a bonus or something like that. I maybe at some point I can do that. But I think the most important thing at this point is that this is a genuine study. And Mr. Jacobs did go on to get his PhD in human development. By the way, he also is a JD, he's a doctor of jurisprudence. He's a lawyer. Hopefully he'll become a judge and won't say there's no heartbeat until just electrical signals. I think he's going to be a very good person in the future in this regard. Okay, now the other thing I want to do is to give, you might say, well, that's just one study. Oh, Well, let me first of all say this. It's just not one study. It's 5,577 people. And of that, 96% all affirm the same information. So now I'd like to read something more, but I don't. Fortunately, yes, I do have it. Before I end, I have something here which I think is really important. Okay, but what I want to do now is I want to read a summary. Okay, that when it is titled "When Human Life Begins." It's put out March 2017 by the American College of Pediatricians. Pretty important group of people. And this is what they said. I'm going to read the entire abstract, which is a paragraph long. It's not going to take long. The predominance of human biological research, the overwhelming amount of research on human biology confirms that human life begins at conception/fertilization. At fertilization, listen, this is really important. At that point of fertilization, the human being emerges as a whole, genetically distinct, individuated, zygotic, living human organism, a member of the species Homo sapiens, needing only the proper environment in order to grow and develop. The difference between the individual in its adult stage, which is the parents, and its zygotic stage, which is this embryo, is one of form, not nature. So even though it's just cells genetically developing at that point, okay, and we need that DNA in order to create the human being, the future human being, all right? And by the way, that DNA is exclusively unique to you. You, each one of you that are listening right now, have your own DNA. No one else has the same DNA. That God created you unique. He didn't create you in a cluster of other individuals, all that have the same qualities and characteristics. You are uniquely you, who you are, who God created for a purpose. We're going to get into that part too. I mean, there's so much to this that, either you're going to believe it or you're going to deny it. And there's going to be deniers right to the last day when Jesus comes back and says, I'm going to separate the wheat from the chaff. I mean, there's going to be people still saying, no, it's not a human being. Oh, come on. That's a bunch of whatever. All right. Okay, so let me finish this. The difference between the individual in its adult stage and its zygotic stage is one of form, not nature. That means, this statement focuses on the scientific evidence of when an individual human being begins. Human life begins. It's basically saying is that what we're about here is exclusively, I'll use a word here that makes sense to me, like an explosion almost. It's called typidency. It's one of the words. It's also blastocyte. These are different words that use what happens at the point of fertilization. But what happens is that 23 chromosomes from the male and 23 from the female get together. There's 46 chromosomes, and we have another human being on its way. All right. Now, let's go back to this group of individuals, 5,300 people that said that human life begins at fertilization from across the world. Some of them were invited to the Congress of the United States to testify. Some of the world's most prominent scientists and physicians testified to U.S. Senate committee that human life begins. A United States Senate Judiciary Subcommittee invited experts to testify on the question of when life begins. Let me just read what some of these people said. It's not really long, but be attentive, please. Dr. Alfred Bongiovanni, okay, professor of pediatrics and obstetrics at the University of Pennsylvania, stated, I have learned from my earliest medical education that human life begins at the time of conception. I submit that human life is present throughout this entire sequence from conception to adulthood, and that any interruption at any point throughout this time constitutes a termination of human life. I am no more prepared to say that these early stages of development in the womb represent, he's not able to say, represent an incomplete human being. That I would have to say that a child who is at the point of just becoming just entering into puberty, that he would have to say, well, just before puberty, it's not a human being, because that's another stage of development. Right? So what he's saying is that at fertilization, the development process begins and continues, and even after birth, you have all kinds of different changes in the human body. One of the biggest is when every individual enters puberty. That's a gigantic change in our human development. Okay, so that's one physician. Okay, another is Dr. Watson Bowles, University of Colorado Medical School. The beginning of a single human life is, from a biological point of view, a simple and straightforward matter. The beginning is conception. The straightforward biological fact should not be distorted to serve sociological, political, or economic goals. Okay. Now, he's acknowledging that there are going to be people who have other points of view, but he thinks they really don't have really a leg to stand on, because purely from a biological point of view, human life begins at that point. And this is the one I like the best. It's for a gentleman, okay, his name is Ashley Montague, a geneticist and professor at Harvard University and Rutgers University. Listen to this. He is unsympathetic to the pro-life cause and care less. Nevertheless, he affirms unequivocally the basic fact is simple. Life begins not at birth, but conception. All right, so some of this stuff can be found on, this is written by Randy Alcom, Alcom, March 8th, 2010. All right, so what we have is within the last 15 to 20 years, we've had statements indicating in a very powerful way, either by the people that have been researched and come before the Senate, the American College of Pediatricians, and also this international study, have totally affirmed. So when you hear stuff like life doesn't begin until viability, or the brainwave, or the heartbeat, that's absolutely against science. And if you're a person who thinks science is an important aspect of our life, scientific fact is important, is necessary, then you can't deny those truths. So I'm going to end this third podcast with that. There's going to be many, many more podcasts on many, many aspects of human development, not just fetal development, but human development. Some of the abuses of people, okay? Some of the lies and distortions that you're not going to hear from the mass media. You're not going to hear from church officials, many, many people in the religious communities. I can tell you what my personal feeling is. I might be totally wrong. I might be biased, but this is what I feel. Don't want to talk about human development, because there's people in their congregations who feel very strongly one way or the other, whether, they might think you're not a human being until you're born, as opposed to somebody who might agree that it's at the point. They don't want to get into that theological, philosophical, sociological, scientific discussion. They just want to go through what they need to go through to talk to you about church and talk to you about the Bible and talk to you about what Jesus said. What Jesus said is tell the truth. I am the way, I am the truth. But for some reason, our ministers and our priests fall short of that. And some of the reason why that's happening too is that there are people in higher authority, especially in churches where there's bishops. Stay away from those controversial points of view. Keep quiet. So what the priests do, they don't want to get in trouble. The minister doesn't want to get in trouble. The pastor doesn't want to get in trouble with the bishop. So what they do is they listen to the bishop. We need bishops to get out there and pound the pavement. Well, who is pounding the pavement? Me. A 75-year-old, baptized, Jesus-loving human being, Christian man. That's who's pounding the pavement. We should all be embarrassed. Doctors should be embarrassed. These doctors, they report this to the subcommittee in the Congress. And what did they do after that? Did you ever see them on TV? Maybe they wrote a book. Costs $35 to buy. Nobody buys it. It's crazy, guys. It really is crazy. Okay. So what I want to leave you with is this. Stay strong in the faith. Stay steadfast in speaking the truth and living the truth. Support the sanctity and dignity of the human person, and know that you are not alone. You are loved and cherished by the divine giver of all life, the creator of all life, the one that created you and me uniquely. Different DNA, completely different DNAs. You're a unique person. Be that unique person. Don't be part of the social structure where no one knows who you are. You just, you float through life. I'm not going to float through life. Right? I'm not going to float through life. I'm going to be out there in a big way, making some waves. Big waves. Tsunami waves. Let's grow up. Let's live life the way God wants us to live it, not the way we want. Or our spouse might say, "Oh, just keep quiet. We're going to get in trouble. The neighbors are going to think we're crazy people." I don't care if they think I'm crazy. I am crazy for Jesus. All right, this is getting good. All right. So thanks for joining me today on Dr. Nick, the Apostle Paul's messenger. I hope this message touches your heart and gives you something to consider. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe so you never miss a conversation, and click that bell. That's important. Okay? And if you found value in today's discussion, please share it with your friend who might need to hear it. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So connect with me by emailing me at drnick.mazza, my last name Mazza, M-A-Z-Z-A, at gmail.com. I'll say that again, drnick.mazza@gmail.com. Send in your questions, and let's keep this conversation moving. Until next time, stay strong in the faith, stand firm in the truth, and remember, you are never alone on this journey. God bless.